As Hashem Yisborach, we begin the new Masechta Moed Katan, which the title of the Masechta means the small holiday, which is actually a reference to Chayil HaMoed, which is the minor part of the holiday, which is the intermediate days. There are three prakim in this Masechta. The first two prakim discuss the laws of Chol HaMoed. The third parak discusses related halachas, that of Avelis, of mourning, and of Nidui. And the reason why it's related is because they have similar types of exemptions regarding who is allowed to, let's say, cut their hair and launder their clothing on Chol HaMoed. Then we get into those related halachas of Avelis and Nidui too. And we begin the first parak Mashkin Beis HaShlachin, which the topic of the parak is like the name of Mashkin, that you're allowed to get ahead and water an irrigated field, which that's the topic of Heter Malacha. What are the things that are allowed to be done on Chol HaMoed? Because as we'll see, from the get-go, that there are prohibitions of doing Malacha on Chol HaMoed. And that's what our parak is discussing, that which is, those are permitted malachas that are allowed to be done. Shis corresponds by Kazakh and Cheskel to anything that Chaim Rishon is joining us for today's daf. Some of these we're going to discuss in today's daf are, like we mentioned, regarding the different types of malachas that are allowed to be done regarding a person's land on Chol HaMoed, and the related halachas of Shemitah, which share similar halachas, therefore it's mentioned in our Mishnah. The Gemara discusses who is the Tana of our Mishnah, because we find two primary categorical halachas in our Mishnah. One, that harvacha, gain, is forbidden, and only that of hefsid, of the makom seder, that's permitted to malach. And additionally, even when there's a loss, what we call davar avad, you're allowed to do that. It's only if it's not a tirchi yisir, but if it's extra overly exerting oneself, even that would be forbidden. So the Gemara attempts to find who that is. The Gemara also discusses what is the term mashkin beis hashlachin, which we find that's the term of an irrigated field. Where would the etymology, what's the root of that word? Where would we find that? Additionally, the Gemara gets into a discussion that relates back to the halacha of our Mishnah of when someone on Shabbos is weeding or watering. What actual malacha of Shabbos is he violating? Is it chayrish, is it plowing, or is it re'ah, or is it planting? And that relates into a discussion regarding that of klayim. What is the prohibition of klayim, and what would that isser of klayim include? So with that we begin, that base, we begin Amid Aleph, we begin the new Masechta, the new parak Mashkin Beis HaShlachin. It says the Mishnah, Mashkin, one is allowed to water Beis HaShlachin, an irrigated field, which the Rashi I'm using is the Rashi on the side of the Gemara, although it's well known that this is not really Rashi, it's Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg. Sometimes we'll use the Rashi Ksav Yad, which that's the more authoritative interpretation of Rashi. We'll use the Mafarish, as it's called when it's not Rashi, as it is in many Masechtas. But it's a field that's on a mountain, and therefore you have to constantly be watering it, because obviously the water doesn't stay on the mountain. And so that's what we're saying in the Mishnah. You're allowed to water it even b'moed. Obviously, moed doesn't mean on Yom Tov itself. It means on Chayil Shal Moed, on the intermediate days of the Yom Tov, which is again the theme of this Masechta. Because it would be a great loss if a person wouldn't water it on Chol HaMoed, like Taisus mentions it, because you have to constantly be watering it. And if you don't water it, it's going to get ruined. And something of loss, which in halachic terminology we always call it davar ha'avid, Rashi calls it davar shel hefsid, the Chacham permit to put an effort in for that on Chol HaMoed. So that's one concept we're pointing out. That of davar ha'avid our Mishnah is talking about is permitted. And where do you find this? So Rashi sources this in Mesechtes Chagiga Daf Yud and Aleph. Pasuk says in Devarim Yud Zayin, Sheishes Yom Teichel Matzah, 6 days eat matzahs. And B'Yom Shvi Atzes L'Hashem Hakecha. The seventh day you have to be contained for Hashem your God. Now, it's comparing the seventh day to the previous 6 days. Just like the seventh day you have to be contained from doing malacha, so to the first 6 days of Pesach, which obviously include Chol HaMoed, is you should be contained from doing malacha. Now, if you're going to say just like on the seventh day on Shvi Shel Pesach you can't do any malacha, so to the first 6 days you have to be contained from doing any malacha. No, it says hashabi, to say the seventh day is contained from all malacha, but the first 6 days are not totally contained from all malacha. So what is it? Is it asur or is it not? So that was only given over to the sages to tell you which malacha is forbidden on Chol HaMoed and which one is permitted. And a malacha that has a loss related to it, if you're not going to do it, for example, like the opening halacha of this Masechta of watering an irrigated field, which that's what an irrigated field is, it's not sufficient with rainwater, you have to be irrigating it, that the Chacham permitted that to be done. That's the opening halacha of our Masechta. Now, additionally, uveshvius, which the Gemara is going to explain what is the heter, but you're allowed to also water, because Shemitah obviously has a different halachic context than that of Chol HaMoed. The Gemara is going to explain why would we say that you're allowed to water a field in the Shemitah year if you not do work on your field. Now, continues the Mishnah. This that I'm letting you water an irrigated field is bein memayin sheyatsa betchila, is whether it's a spring that's just starting now to spring forth, that it was never an established spring before Yom Tov, and bein memayin shel yatsa betchila, and whether it's a spring that is not just starting right now, rather it's been a spring for many, many years, it's been going for a long time. You're allowed to on Shemitah and the Chol HaMoed water the field from, and the Gemara is going to explain exactly what are we qualifying with this, but you're allowed to use both of these springs on Chol HaMoed and on Shemitah. Okay, you're allowed to use a spring, again, whether it's new or not, aval ein mashkin, but you cannot water from, lo mimei hageshamim, you can't take rainwater, which, as the Gemara is going to explain, would involve a tirchi seira. That's another concept we're pointing out, that although we allow you to do some tircha for a davar ha'avid, but a tircha meruba, an extra overly exerting, even that would not be allowed, even though it would be a davar shel hafsid, even though it would be a loss, so you can't use the rainwater. And v'lo mehakilan, you can't use neither well water, which some Gemaras like mine brings from Rashi in the Rif, that says it's like a deep well. And there's a lot of water that was gathered from the rain, but it would be very difficult, what again called tirchi yasera, that's a key word, to go ahead and draw the water, which the Rashi over there points out that that's only going on Chol HaMoed. Because you're running Shemitah, there's no element of tirchi yasera. We don't mind how much tirchi you put in on Shemitah. It's only a problem about work in the field. So this halacha of qualifying that it has to be, that you can't use the rainwater, you can't use the well water, because of the tircha related to it, that's specifically a qualification of Chol HaMoed. Similarly, again, these are all qualifications that of tirchi yaseh that we don't allow when you're overly exerting yourself. Ve'inois and ugiyos. You can't make these ditches like funim for the grapevine, which you make around it. Again, it involves too much tircha. Similarly, Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, he says, Einois nesa'ama betchila. You're not allowed to initially make a canal, the moed on Chol HaMoed. Okay, that we get it because that's tircha meruba. Uveshvius and on the Shemitah year too. Now, obviously, as we pointed out before, the halacha of tircha wouldn't apply to Shemitah. So Rashi Ksav Yad, he points out, as the Gemara is going to tell us, because it looks like oider, which is a malacha of the karka, of like hoeing. It looks like you're working the land. Although you're doing it to make a canal, you're not here trying to improve the land. Since it looks like that, that would be forbidden in the Shemitah year too, according to the Rebbe Lozman Azariah. Rachamim, they disagree. They say, no, you are allowed to initially make a canal in your property in the Shemitah year because it's not avodah, meaning shal karka, you're just trying to make a canal. And moreover, you're also allowed to fix a canal that got ruined. You're allowed to fix it on Chol HaMoed. So let's say earth fell in over there and it's clogging it up and it's not flowing anymore, you're allowed to fix it. But the Chacham agreed initially to make a canal, you're not allowed to. Again, because that would be tircha meruba, that would be an overly exerting oneself, which is forbidden to do on Chol HaMoed. And you could fix the cisterns of water that are in the public domain, and you could clear it out, like Taisa says. If let's say the pit filled up with sediment, with waste matter, then you could clear it out to dig deeper down into the soft earth. But to initially dig such a well on Chol HaMoed where the ground is hard, again, no, because that would be tirchi yasera, that would be overly exerting. Again, this is a heter that's for the public, and that's actually related to the next halachas. You could fix the roads and the streets, the public bathhouses, and this is another important, highlighting the famous halachas of Chol HaMoed. You could do all needs of the public on Chol HaMoed, and you could mark the graves, which the way they used to do it, they would take lime and dilute it and dissolve it and pour it onto the areas where those who are passing by that they want to stay tahar should not become tameh because there's a dead person over there. And Taisa points out the reason why you could do this is because this is not such a tircha to just make a marker on the graves. And v'yotzin, some take out the word af, al haklayim, that you go out a Chol HaMoed of Pesach, when the klayim, when forbidden mixtures are starting to grow, you go out and you would have them tear it out not to violate the Isser of Klein, which Tyson points out that this is a mitzvah to go out, as the Gemara is going to tell us. So it's not dissimilar to all the other things that are Masakh, which that's like we let you. This is an obligation actually on Chol Moed that to go out on for a client also. So it's just mentioning together to other things that you go out to fix things, you also go out to have people rip out their client. Okay, so the Gemara goes back to the opening halacha of Mishnah. We said that it's permitted to water an irrigated field that you need to, because we said it's going to be a hefsid meruba. If you don't, it's going to be a great loss. So you can be watering this irrigated field, and we pointed out that it could be from any spring. A spring that just started, where the water started coming out now, or it's been a spring for many, many months, many years. Either one you could use. So the Gemara wonders, why do you have to say both? Now you're going to tell me, you told me that if it's a new spring, it's okay, you could use such a spring to water a Chol Moed. Now that's a chiddush. Why is a new spring a chiddush? Because the asalein pule. If you have a new spring, the ground around it could fall apart because it's not yet solidified in its in the water that's coming out over there. So it could still fall into disuse. And still mashkin, still a Chol Moed, we said that you could water from that spring, and we're not concerned that, oh, maybe it's going to fall apart, that the water's going to stop coming out, and that you're going to go somewhere else to get water because you're already involved in trying to water it, and then you're going to go and engage in the Tirch Yisrael, overly exerting yourself to get water from somewhere else. We're not concerned from that. So then, so if the other case, which actually the second case that you mentioned, that if it's not a new spring, it's been the spring for a long time, we're not concerned that it's going to cave in. So do I have to tell you that you can water from a Chol Moed? Why do you say that you can water the irrigated field from not only a new spring and also an old spring? Of course an old spring. An old spring is more reliable. There's no reason why I should think it should stop working and I'm going to try to go somewhere else to get water, which that we might be concerned for because you're going to do a Tirch Yisrael, which we don't let, the Tana Mishnah. So Amri, they said it's true. No, it was necessary to say that other case too. Why? Tana, had we only said the first case of Mayin Shiatz B'Tchila, which is the bigger Chiddush one, that you could even use a new spring to water from the for your irrigated field of Chol Moed. Yeah, but I would have thought to say, and this is the important part for the diuk of it, for the inference, because what did we say in the Mishnah? Could you water from a spring? We only said you could water an irrigated field. Now we didn't qualify yet, but there's another type of a field that's excluded from that. Now that exclusion, I would have thought to say, would be limited to the case that you're describing. And that is, yes, only over here by a new spring. That's where you could only use it for an irrigated field. But Beis Habal, which is another type of a field, what's called a rain field, which is a field that's very deep in the lowlands. You don't have to water it, because the rains will always come down to it. And therefore there's not such a loss that you're not going to go actively water it yourself. Oh, so that's the case we're excluding in the Mishnah. We're only letting it irrigate for that it's a loss because you have to constantly be watering it. But a Beis Habal loy, no. But I would say that's only in the case of a new spring, because it's going to come to cave in. And it's not really such a loss. And you might come to a tircha, oh, okay, then we're not going to let a Beis Habal. But regarding, if it's not a new spring, then we're not concerned it's going to come to fall apart. I would say, that even the rain-watered field, I would also let you water it. Because, look, my seed needs water. And it's not, I'm not going to be concerned that you might come to engage in the Tirch Yisrael. Kamash Malan, that's what the Mishnah had to tell me. Also the case of not a new spring. To tell you it doesn't make a difference if it's a new spring. It doesn't make a difference if it's an old spring. That what? Beis HaShlachan in. Yeah, of course, the Beis HaShlachan, all I have to say is the case of the new spring, because that's the bigger chiddush. If I let you water the irrigated field from a new spring, for sure I'm going to let you from an old spring. But I need it for the inferential of Beis Habal, that the rain-watered field, that even if it's not a new spring, which you would say, okay, it's reliable, it's old reliable, go ahead, then you could water even from Beis Habal. Loi, it's for that case that I needed the chiddush of not the new spring, for the inferential, for the diuk of that, the Beis Habal, even there you can't go ahead and water it on Chol Moed, because l'maisa it's not a hefsid, it's not a davar oven. We're not going to let you, even though it's not going to bring you to a Tirch Yisrael. Now, parenthetical, once we mentioned the this case in the Mishnah, the Gemara wants to find the etymology, the root of the word. What does this mean? You're calling this irrigated field Beis HaShlachin. How do you know that it's a lishna de tzachusahi? That it's a terminology of being thirsty? Because that's essentially what we're saying. This land is thirsty. You have to irrigate it. You have to water it. And therefore, if you don't do it on Chol Shemayim, it's going to be a davar ha'av. It's going to be a davar shal hefsid. And if you're allowed to water it on Chol Shemayim, because it's going to be a loss. Where do you find that this term shlachin, it means thirsty? Says the Gemara, because the says the pasuk in Devar, a well-known pasuk by Amalek, says that Amalek, he encountered you on the road, and all the weak ones, and va'ata oyev v'yogeya. You were oyev and yogeya. What does oyev mean? So Taisa points out, oyev means thirsty for water. How does he know that? Because he brings the pasuk in Yirmiyah. Hirvesi nefesh ayefa. I satisfied and giving to drink a nefesh that's oyev. So you see that oyev is a terminology of thirsty. And the yogeya is worn out. Now, what's the targum? What's the Aramaic translation on oyev? That mishalhei v'loi, that you were faint, meaning thirsty, and worn out. So you see that mishalhei means thirsty, and we know that the hey could be interchangeable with the ches. So mishalhei is like mishalhei. So the word Beis HaShlachin means the thirsty field, which is the field that needs to be watered. And says the Gemara, okay, my mashma the high Beis Habal, which we didn't talk about in the Mishnah, but we said the inference was that a rain field is being excluded because you don't have to water it; it gets watered from the rain. Where do we find that the term Beis Habal means lishna de miyasvusihi? That it's something that is settled, that is penetrated, that is watered, that is not thirsty, that is satisfied, that is being fed. Because the Chsiv, says a pasuk in Yeshaya. It says, Ki yival bocher besula. When a boy is going to be intimate with the girl, so it says there in the pasuk, Yibalucha b'noyach, that your sons, meaning Bnei Yisrael, are also going to be intimate. And it's like Chasan al-Kala, that's how Hashem is going to rejoice on you. Now, when we take a minan, the targum of Yival, is what, again, the son of Beis Habal, is that a kama demitoisev ulem and besulta. Just like you have that the young man is with the young girl, so to yisyasvin begavech benaich, that's how your sons are going to be settled amongst you. But you see that the settling, which is that, whether it be an emotional settling, whether it be a physical, but it's a completion of what the term yival means. Like you see, it's translated mitoisav. Therefore, the stay Beis Habal is called that because that is settled, that is whole, that is completed because of the rain that comes to it and doesn't need you to water it. Now, going back to the halacha of the Mishnah, so we clarified the opening halacha, why it says Mayin Shelo Yatsa B'Tchila too, and we said what the words of Shlachin, which is coming to exclude Beis Habal. So now the Gemara says, Man Tana, who's the Tana of our Mishnah? And that tells us 2 points. First of all, the Pseidain, you're allowed to go ahead and do a tircha, a chal shemayid, like a malacha, if it's going to be a situation of loss, like a Beis HaShlachin, an irrigated field. If you don't water it, it's going to ruin the field. That's where you're allowed to do malacha. But harvachaloi, if it's just for profit, like for example, stay Beis Habal, which our Mishnah is inferring that you're not allowed to water it, which is a rain-watered field, because it's not such a loss. You don't have to water it. You would gain more. It would make the growth go quicker than later, but it wouldn't be a loss. Now, Taisa points out why we asking who's the Tana of the Mishnah, because we're going to shortly bring that Meir disagrees with the halacha of the Mishnah, and therefore this anonymous Mishnah of ours is not like all other anonymous Mishnayos, which we generally say is like a Meir. So the Gemara wants to know, so who is the Tana of our Mishnah? So point number 1 we see in the Mishnah is that only Beis HaShlachin, not Beis Habal, which is only when for loss we let you, not for gain. Now, additionally, there's a second point we see in our Mishnah. Even when it's going to be a situation of loss, we don't let you overexert yourself for it. Because the Mishnah said, even if we let you water the irrigated field, the stay Beis HaShlachin, which is a situation of loss, but you can't take rainwater, you can't take well water. Why not? Because those are situations of tircha yasera. So we see 2 points in the Tana of our Mishnah. Who is the Tana? A, that it's only for loss, not for gain. And secondly, even by loss, it's only when you're not going to be overly exerting yourself. So when he says, I'll tell you who the Tana of the Mishnah is, Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. The Nan, as we learned in the Mishnah later on the Vav base. Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, he says, if you have water that's beneath one tree, which sometimes water gathers beneath one tree, you can make a small little path from that tree and draw it to another tree so that you could draw the water from one to the other. Which Taisa points out, the reason why you're allowed to do that is because trees are like a beis hashlachah, which trees need a lot more water, therefore it would be considered as a davar shel hefsed if you wouldn't water the trees. Additionally, Taisa says, why does it say moishkin that you could draw the water? It doesn't say mashkin. Because that's the norm, he says, because that's how they usually do by trees, which you usually have the water gathers by one tree, so you make like this little stream from one tree to another tree. Okay, but says the Lezer ben Yaakov, as long as you don't water the whole field, which the reason why we don't let you water the field is because we're talking about a state based sabal. It's a rainwater field, which it would be just profit. So obviously you see that for profit, Rabbi Lezer says you're not allowed to. Oh, here's the Tana of Mishnah, who says only davar shel hefsed, like trees you're allowed to, but davar shel revach, like the rest of the field, the state based sabal, that you're not allowed to water. Says the Gemara, no, you can't prove he's the Tana of the Mishnah. Even the Shammai Rabbi Lezer, what do we find that Rabbi Lezer is harvach ad the law? Yeah, he is saying one out of the 2 points of our Mishnah. He's saying that for profit, you're not allowed to work on Chalash and Moed, and tircha b'makom seder, but to put effort. But harvach ad the law, that's the one thing that he's saying. But the second point of tircha b'makom seder, that even when it's lost, did you not do an overly exertion? Mishamalei, did you hear that? He didn't say anything like that. He didn't say that this that you allow to water the trees is only if you don't put in so much tircha, but it doesn't make such a differentiation. So seemingly he lets in all situations. That's not like the Tana of Mishnah. Tana of Mishnah would have qualified and said, even though I'm letting you water the trees because it's a loss, but don't put in tircha yiseir, like he says in our Mishnah. So he cannot prove that he is the Tana of the Mishnah. So Rav Papa says, no, Haman, who's the Tana of the Mishnah? It's Rabbi Yehuda. Where do we find this? The Tana we learned in the Brisa. The first opinion says, Mayin hayitza b'tchila, and this is what we point out that Rav Meir is not like the Tana of the Mishnah. He says a new spring that just started on Yom Tov. Mashkin memenu, you could water from it on Chalash Moed. Afilas tebi sabah, even a non-irrigated field, even a rainwater field. Rav Meir is the most lenient so far. He lets even a new spring, even for a stay base sabah, which Tana of Mishnah didn't let a stay base sabah. It's not such a loss. He says no, you allow to water even a stay base sabah. Yehuda, he's the Tana we want to point out to be the Tana of Mishnah. He says, Ein mashkin elisidei beis hashlachet shecharbe. He says, you're only allowed to water an irrigated field that dried up. So since it dried up, and we're going to shortly explain what does that mean dried up, but it's a situation of loss, so you're allowed to go ahead and water such a field. Third Tana, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he says, loikach v'loikach, which the Gemara is going to shortly explain what does it mean not this and not this. Okay, that's the first half of the Brisa. Yes, I can remember the more than this Rabbi says, a person cannot clear out the canal of water and use that biyashke and water from there to his garden and to his ruin. Shais explains what exactly are you planting in the ruin. What does that actually mean? But you can't not use that to water your garden and your churva because again it's a tirchi yiseir. Okay, but first the Gemara goes back to explain what does the words of Rabbi Yehuda mean to prove that he's the Tana of the Mishnah. When Rabbi Yehuda said that you could only water a stay based hashlach in an irrigated field shecharva, says the Gemara, my charva. What does Rabbi Yehuda mean when he says that the irrigated field was dried up? If you think, as the literal translation sounds like, that the whole irrigated field dried up, it became like a pit, the whole field. So then why would I be watering such a field on Chalash Moed? It wouldn't even help. It would be way too foregone. So why would I be watering such a field on Chalash Moed? Rather, Abaya says, what obviously means is when it says shecharba that it dried up, it doesn't mean that the whole field dried up. It means shecharba mimayin zeh, meaning the spring that they used to water the field from, that spring dried up. And now another spring is coming forth. Okay, so as Rashi explains, so since this irrigated field was always being watered, if you're not going to water it right now, so point number one, it would be a hefsid meruba. It would be a great loss if you didn't water it on Chol Hashemayim. Even so, Rabbi Yehuda only permits from a spring that is coming out in the field, which is not such a tircha. But let's say from rainwater or well water, which would be more of a tircha to go get that water, he wouldn't permit it even for a beis hashlachem. Those are the 2 points of our Mishnah. I'm only letting you in a beis hashlachem shecharva, which you said charva doesn't mean the whole thing was dried up, but one of the springs got dried up and now there's a new one, which again, if you didn't water it would be a loss, so qualification number 1's got to be a situation of loss. And number 2, but I'm only letting you from a spring, which obviously means I don't let you go to well water, I don't let you get rainwater, which would be tircha. So those are the 2 points in the Mishnah. Moreover, Rashi points out another point, is that Rabbi Yehuda said in his second statement that you cannot clear out the canal to water the garden and the churva, which obviously again Rabbi Yehuda does not let tircha yisera, overly exerting yourself. Now, before we finish the proof that the time of the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, now what did Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah mean when he said loikach v'loikach, not this and not this? What did that mean? He was saying loishno charav mayana doesn't make a difference if the spring dried up. But it doesn't make a difference if the spring did not dry up, which that was Rabbi Yehuda's case. Rabbi Yehuda said, oh, the spring was there, it dried up, and now you have a new one. He says it doesn't make a difference. Because mayin sheyatz betchila, even if it was that there was originally a spring that dried up, but it wasn't, it doesn't make a difference. It's because mayin sheyatz betchila loy. A new spring, you can't use on Chol Hashemayim. So like Rashi explains, obviously the Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he doesn't differentiate even if the spring dried up, which, if there was a pre-existing spring, and it would be a great loss now to not water, he holds, if there's a new spring, I don't care if they used to be watered because there was an old spring or there wasn't, he holds both would be usher. Well, that's obviously not like the halacha by Mishnah, because he's disqualifying even by hefsid meruba, even if it's not a tircha. He doesn't like a new spring, whether there was an old one before or wasn't. So, obviously, the time of Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Neither one of these Tanoim are saying the 2 points of our Mishnah. And Rabbi Yehuda is the only one who says these 2 points. Hefsid, you have to have a situation of hefsid, and you also have to have a situation, not a tircha yisera. Says the Gemara, no, not a raya. Umimai, how do you know? What do you mean, what's wrong? Dilma ad kan lekam Rabbi Yehuda, where do we find Rabbi Yehuda saying his halacha of what? Of beis hashlachem. And yes, he's only telling you could do it by irrigated field. And the inference, which it seems to be so for like our Mishnah, based about like, but he wouldn't let you for a rain-watered field. That's elamayin sheyatza betchila. What's the case he was talking about? He was going on the case that Reb Meir started off. Reb Meir was the first one who started speaking in the dress. Reb Meir spoke about a case of a new spring. Reb Meir said, I don't care, no problem about a new spring, and you can even water a stay based about. And then Reb Yehuda said, no. The new spring could only be for an irrigated field that dried up. And Elazar ben Azariah says, look, new spring, I hate new spring, I don't care if there was old spring that dried up, I don't care. New springs, I don't like at all. So Meir says, I have no problem with new springs. Elazar ben Azariah says, I don't like new springs, you can't use at all. And Rabbi Yehuda says, new spring? Because the old one dried up? Okay, so that's going to be a situation of hefsid, because it was being watered till now. Okay, you could use the spring, it's not such a tircha, you can't use a tircha, that's what you could use. So wait a second. Says the Gemara, as you continue to the base, you're running into a problem. You can't prove he's a Tanakh Mishnah. Why? Because yes, a new spring, that's where he says only irrigated field and not non-irrigated field, because demosilin pule. A new spring, it could run into problems. Because we don't know, it hasn't been true and tested yet, tried and tested. It might fall in, it might cave in. And the problem with that is if it does cave in, you might end up saying, okay, I'm trying to water, it's not working. You might then go through a tircha yisera and go to some well or go to some rain gathering, and that's the problem. But let's say it was a spring that's not just starting now. This old spring's been here from Yazid already. We're not concerned that's going to come to cave in. Then maybe even by the rain-watered field, Rabbi Yehuda would permit you to water a Chol Hashemayim. Now, our Mishnah, on the other hand, however, that said that the Beis HaShlachem, the opening words of our parak, which we call Mashke Beis HaShlachem, we said that you would only water an irrigated field. We said 2 cases. We said from a new one and an old one, which the inference was on both those cases, and that's actually why we start with the Gemara by saying this point, which obviously would let us in to try to say who's the Tana Mishnah, was saying Beis Abal is not even just by new, but even by old. So the Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda. Because Rabbi Yehuda is only saying his halacha in a new spring. An old spring sounds like a Beis Abal would be allowed to water. But our Mishnah says no, Beis Abal can't be not new, not old. So says the Gemara, okay, if that's the case, Masnina Man Termaya. So who's the Tana of the Mishnah? Like Rashi points out. It can't be the first one we tried bringing, who's the Mishnah Navav and Beis Rabbi and Yaakov. Like you said, he's only proving that he allows Hefsid and not Revach, but we couldn't prove that he doesn't allow you to do Tirchi Yisera. It's also not like Remeir, because Remeir permits even to stay Beis Abal even by a new spring. It's not like Rabbi ben Azariah either, because he holds even by Beis HaShlachin, he wouldn't let you by a new spring, which is how the Mishnah does let a new spring. And you tell me it's not like Rabbi Yehuda either. Which Taisa says, okay, so why is the Gemara exploring to show it's Rabbi Yehuda better than all the other Tanaim? Because Taisa said on 2 points, Lamaisa, we do find he's like the Tana of the Mishnah. So he seems to be the best candidate to be the Tana of the Mishnah. So Ella says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not true. He is the Tana of the Mishnah. It doesn't make a difference if it's a new spring. It doesn't make a difference if it's not new spring, meaning it's been there for a while. Yes, like we said in the Mishnah, Beis HaShlachin in that would only be for an irrigated field, but Beis Abal loy. But it would not be for a non-irrigated field, and if he's the Tana of Mishnah. But then you pointed out, why in the Brisa does it say specifically that they're discussing a new spring, which that we ran into a whole problem to say, oh, only there Beis Abal not, but if it wasn't new, then we would let Beis Abal. No, it's not true. His halacha of excluding Beis Abal is even if it's not new. But the reason why I said about a new one is there's 3 opinions in the Brisa, and actually the opening opinion who mentioned this element was Remeir, that would tell you that even a new spring, mashkin mimeno, he held you could water from it, afila stay habal, even a non-irrigated field, which as Taisa points out, that koyach dehatera adif. If we're going to tell you the thrust of one Tana's opinion, we'll choose Remeir to pick a case that would show his chiddush over Rabbi Yehuda's chiddush, because Remeir is the makel, and he's saying that you could even water a non-irrigated field, and even from a new one. That's why we picked that case, and therefore, but it's not a raya. Rabbi Yehuda would hold, like the halacha of a Mishnah, that would even be by a not new spring, that even then it would only be an irrigated field and not a non-irrigated field, and so the time of the Mishnah could be like a Yehuda. Now, relating back to the halacha of the Mishnah, Itmar, we learned the following machlekes. Hamanachish, if someone is weeding, which is that he tears out the bad grass from the good. Now, when he does rip out the bad, it helps the good ones grow better. And or another case, if someone is watering the seeds, where he throws water by the roots of the grass, if he does either one of these things b'Shabbos, on Shabbos. So the question is, what malacha is that considered that you have to warn him? Because as Taisa points out, a person cannot get lashes or get executed only if he was warned specifically which negative prohibition is he violating. You have to explicitly tell him what aver is he doing. Because Rashi tells us this person's definitely not doing kaitzer. Why is he not kaitzer? When he's ripping out the bad grass. No, because his intention is not to take the grass, it's to fix the good grass in the field by tearing out the bad. So what malacha is he doing that you're going to warn him about on Shabbos? So Rabbi Amar says Mishum Chayvish. It's considered plowing in that category. Rabbi Yisrael Mishum Zerei says it's because of planting, which Chayvish, plowing, Zerei, planting, Kaitzer, ripping out, are all of his malachas, as the Gemara says in Shabbos, on Periklal Gadol. So what's the machlekes of it? So the Gemara explains. Amar Rabbi. Rabbi says, you know, it's logical like me that I say that weeding and watering are violations of chayrish of plowing. Why? Because, and again, it can't be its own malacha, because there's long lamates malachas, which these are the things that were done in the Mishkan. We have to just find what category is it under. What is it a derivative of? So, madar chashacha, just like the norm of what plowing is. What does plowing do? Is litapuyada. It softens the ground to make it more susceptible to planting. So hainami metapuyada. When you're watering, when you're ripping out the weeds, it's softening the ground. It's not actively growing anything. It's just it's a preparation essentially for allowing growth to happen. That's what plowing is. Plowing is tilling the land so that now you could plant. So too this, weeding is not actively growing anything, it's facilitating that growth could happen. So it's the same thing as chayrish. I'm Rabbi Yosef. He says, no, it's logical like me that it's a violation of Zereya planting. You know why? Because Madar Gishal Zereya, just like the normal planting is let's muche peida, that's to sprout forth the produce. Here also it's to sprout forth the produce, what there is already there. When you're watering and you're weeding, essentially you're making the seeds there that are there to grow forth, which is what Zereya is. Now Tosa explains interestingly what the machlekes is, the lumnus. He says that when Rabbah said that you're softening the ground, because he goes based on the primary activity that you did. The primary activity that you did is similar to plowing. Rabbi Yosef says you're right, although the primary malacha you're doing is similar to plowing, but the intention of the person is not to soften the ground. So like the way Tosa says, he encapsulates it, he says, Rabbah holds, we compare it to the maisa, not to the machshava. The maisa that you're doing is not a planting maisa, it's like, it's preparing the ground. That's more like chayrish. Rabbi Yosef goes based on the machshava, which is the primary, not what it's comparable to. What's your intent? Your intent is for the growth of what there is. That's the reya. So that's the machlekes that the Amaram have over here, is this weeding and watering similar to chayrish, or is it similar to the Zereya? Now, Amalei Abai Rabba, Abai says to Rabba, L'didach kasha, l'reisa kasha. I have a difficulty with both of you. L'didach kasha, and it's the same question, just in reverse. I have a difficulty on you because it's only plowing and it's not planting. In other words, why are you not liable for both? But you're doing both. You're doing the element of plowing and you're also doing the element of causing growth. Meaning usually plowing is only plowing. There's no growth, there's no seed even over there. Usually Zereya planting is only planting, you're not preparing anything. When you water, when you weed, you're essentially doing both things. You're facilitating the ability for growth and you're also causing growth. So you should be chayv for both, and we do find that you can be chayv for one act for two malachas, and so it's Rabbi Yosef kasha. The same question as Rabbi Yosef. Only for planting and not for plowing? And if you're going to say that you might be bothered by thinking kalecha dikatarti, whenever there's two violations, you only be liable for one, it's not true. Because Moed Katan Daf said, Zoymer, if someone is pruning on Shabbos, which is similar to weeding, but it's like taking out the bad branches of the tree. Now, let's say at the same time that he's pruning the tree, he also needs the wood for firewood. So chayv shtayim, he's going to be liable for two. Achas mishum neitea. One is because of planting, because when you're pruning, you're helping the tree grow more, which is neitea, which is planting. It's like zereya just by a tree. Achas mishum kaitzer. And one is for harvesting, because you need the wood, and you're like harvesting the wood. So you see, it can be chayv for two. So Zimar Kashi, that's definitely a difficulty on both of them, why they each saying only their own opinion and not saying the other one's opinion too. Which Tosa points out, he says, what do you mean? Don't we say a well-known Talmudic dictum of Kedei Rishasa, you only chayv for one Risha, not for two Rishas? What's this idea of being chayv for one act, two things? So Tosa says, no, that only would be, let's say, for one lashes and for one death penalty. But if both of them are similar, that they're both violations of lashes, that would actually be considered Chad Risha and actually would not be excluded from Rishasa. You actually would be chayiv for these two violations. Like when you eat an ant, the Gemara tells us elsewhere, like an arba, you see for one act, you could be liable for more than one thing. And it's difficult why Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef don't agree to each other's, their malacha of chayrish or zuriyah. But the point is, we're going to get to how it comes back to the halacha of the Mishnah. But first, Esved Rabbi Yosef l'Rabba. Rabbi Yosef, he asks on Rabba, these are the two disputants. The Rabba who said that watering and weeding is chayrish, is plowing, he asks from the following brisa. The brisa says, hamanachich, if someone is weeding, or if let's say he covers over the seeds with earth, if he does this l'klayim, where it's, let's say you have grape seeds planted together with wheat and barley seeds, so like you get lashes because the Torah tells you in Vayikra test scissor climb, not a plant climb, and here you are, you're planting the climb by weeding and by covering it with earth. That's the Tanakh Amar. He says, he says, yeah, he said, actually, even if you don't even cover it with earth, even if you just see climb planted and you don't ruin it, you don't take it apart, even just maintaining it, you also get lashes for that. Now, it says the Gemara, it says Rabbi Yosef to Rabbi. It makes sense according to me that I says, what is the violation of weeding? It's mishum zereya, it's considered that of planting. Hainu, for that reason I can understand that weeding of Kalayim is going to be getting lashes because that's Sirus Riba Kalayim. You're not allowed to plant Kalayim, like it says, Lei Sizra. So when you're weeding the bad stuff to make sure that the Kalayim is going to grow the way the forbidden mixture, of course it makes sense that you'll get lashes. But you who said that weeding is under the category of plowing, plowing for the purposes of that you're gonna plant Kalayim, which is what Harisha is, which is plowing before you've planted Miyasira, is that prohibited? When you plow, there was no Kalayim at all. So according to you, it doesn't make sense. If weeding is plowing, how can you be chayav for plowing on Kalayim? So Rabbi said to him, you're right. The weeding is not getting lashes from planting. It's mishum mekayim. It's because maintaining it, which is a passive act, not of planting, and therefore it would be for plowing too. Well, what I mean, but it says Rabbi Yisrael, how could you say that? But the seif of the Bryce has said that you can be liable for Kalayim even for maintaining it. Obviously, Tanakam is not going because of a passive act of maintaining, which what plowing would be, and that which what like weeding would be. So how can you say that the weeding is because of plowing, which is a Mekayim act, when the Tanakam is obviously saying different than Rebbe Kiva? Says the Rabbi says no, Rebbe Kiva, it's all Rebbe Kiva. My Tam come and he's explaining what's the reason. My Tam, what's the reason? Why is it when you're weeding or covering it over with earth of climbing you're going to get lashes? Mishum Mekayim, you're right, it's not planting. It's like because you're maintaining it, which plowing of a weeding type of plowing would also be maintaining it. Because he says also Mekayim, so it's not difficult on Rabbah because it is not because of planting, it is because of plowing, but it's maintaining the climb. Says the Gemara, once we introduce this Bryce in my time to Rebbe Kiva, what is the reason of Rebbe Kiva? Why would you be liable for just maintaining? Because the time you learn the Bryce, your field, you shouldn't plant climb. Now, from the pasuk, I would only know that you'd be chayiv for like the words of the pasuk of planting. Mekayim in how do you be liable even for maintaining? The pasuk teaches you kalayim sad chaloi. Now, there's different girsayis throughout Shas when this is brought. Some places it's from the words after that, which what would it say kalayim sad chaloi? So it's because you really read it one way. You read it. There's a pasuk in Vayikra Yates that eschulkai seitish mayru behem chaloi sarbia kalayim loy sarbia kalayim, and then it's sad chaloi sizra. But you could read it from the word before without having the word sizra at the end. You can read it kalayim sad chaloi. Your field shouldn't have kalayim. So you see that any type of kalayim, even just maintaining. Rashi here brings it differently. At least when we say Rashi, we mean the mafarish, that even though it says le sizra kalayim, don't plant kalayim, we take away the word sizra and we darshan as if the word sizra wasn't there. We read it loy kalayim. There shouldn't be kalayim at all. You have to mevatlet, and that's how Rashi over here says it. But be that as it may, we have a source that you're not have climb, and even from a kind you'd be chayiv. Here's the reason why we brought in this whole discussion, this machlekes Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, because we're going to ask from our Mishnah. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah that says the opening halacha of our Masechta, mashkin beis hashlachem amayid b'shviz, you could water an irrigated field on chalash amayid and on the Shemitah year. Okay. Bishlam amayid, I understand why on chalash amayid you're allowed to water an irrigated field, because really, malach is not forbidden on chalash amayid. The only reason is mishum tirchu. It's because of exerting yourself. When we want chalash amayid, a person could be benachas, yishuv das, celebrate the holiday, and the Torah / Chacham, in which the Chacham are qualifying the halacha, they didn't want you to be busy with other things. But the Mokum say the Shad Rabbanan, but as a situation of loss, the Rabbanan letting you to put through a tircha of chalash amayid, as we explained before, when the Chacham are there, they qualify what's permitted, what's forbidden, because they don't want you to have a loss. But the Shvi is, but regarding the second halacha, which we didn't speak about yet, the opening halacha of our Mishnah spoke about not just chol amayid, also spoke about Shemitah year. But I don't understand. You're talking about mashkin beis hashlachem. You're watering a field on the Shemitah year. Now, where do you hold a Rabbi Yosef that watering is considered planting? Whether you hold like Rabbah that holds that watering is plowing, which that was the machlokes we mentioned before between Rabbi and Yosef, doesn't make a difference which one. Do you think you're allowed to plant or plow in the Shemitah year? But then we learn that from B'chodesh B'kotz Tishbais, which the Gemara elsewhere tells us that it was not teaching us anything regarding Shabbos, because obviously you don't have to tell me that plowing and harvesting is forbidden on Shabbos, because the Rebbe says you can't do Omalacha. It's obviously regarding the Shemitah year. And therefore on the Shemitah year, you're not allowed to plant, you're not allowed to plow. So how can you say mashkin beis hashlachin b'mayid u'b'shviyas? But you're both telling me that watering is one of these two malachas which you cannot do on Shemitah. Abaye says not difficult on both of them. Because we're talking about b'shviyas bezman hazeh. Our Mishnah was talking about Shemitah in today's times, after the Churban Beis Hamikdash, which Shemitah is only rabbinic. And Rebbe is going to Rebbe who says that Shviyas bezman hazeh is only rabbinic. And since it's rabbinic, it's similar to that of Chol HaShemayim. Where milsa de pseida, when it's a davar of it, the Rabbanan permitted it for you. It's kind of like when the Bryce and the Rebbe Yomi says this idea. Pasuk says in Devarim, "V'zed dvar hashmita shmait," and this is the word of the shmita that you should cancel, and that is in the context of when it talks about hashmatas ksaf, when you cancel all monetary loans. But the thing is, b'shtei shmitas akas medaba. The pasuk is mentioning the word shmita 2 times. Why did I say 2 times shmita shmait? To tell you, acha shmitas karka. One is the cancellation of the ground, where you're not allowed to work the ground for the whole year. And Machash means Ksab, one is the cancellation of the money loans, which is 2 different halachas that are unique to Shemitah. Why are we saying them both in the same pasuk? To compare them, to tell you. When you cancel the ground from working, that's when that's when you cancel the monetary loans. But according to biblical law, when you don't have the laws of Shemitah, which that was canceled after the Churban, that you don't have the laws of canceling the ground, according to Rebbe, then you don't cancel the monetary loans. Now, as Rashi explains, so obviously there's a time in history that there's not going to be hashmatas karka, that you're not going to cancel, you're not going to have to not do work on the land. When is that? That's bizman hazeh. So, in today's times that we do have Shemitah, obviously it's not biblical, it's only rabbinic. Oh, it's rabbinic. So the rabbis, like they do by Chol HaShemayim, can tell you b'makom pseida, when it's a situation of loss, like a beis hashlachin, that it's permitted to do malacha Chol HaShemayim. That's the same thing b'mayid, that yes, although these are malachas, both according to Rabbi and Rabbi Yisrael, watering is either plowing or it's planting, which of course in the biblical story of Shemitah would be forbidden. But since it's rabbinic and it would be a davar of it would be a davar shel hesed, therefore the chacham allowed to be mashkin beis hashlachin, not only be Moed, but also the shviyas. Thank you to any time.